But we're going to get right into it. Eric's going to lead us off this week with a little rivalry talk. We had some rivalry games last week in baseball. We got some, rivalry games coming up. So, Eric, take it away.
Thanks, Alex. We're going to get right into it. And, of course, I have the layout with, James being our football guy. I'm going to start with him. My first question is, what are the best and worst rivalries in football in your eyes, James? I have some listed down too, but I want to hear your best and worst team rivalries.
I'm going to kind of take it from a current perspective, some in the last 10 to 15 years, keep it kind of fresh. Because rivalries in football, they last a long time. And there's some really historic and ancient ones that people all know and love, but they're not so much rivalries anymore. My personal favorite for the current here and now is the Niners and the Seahawks. Not just because I'm a Niners fan, but honestly, those games, Niners and Seahawks, when they go at it, they're fun to watch. I'm sure you guys all remember the NFC Championship game a couple years back when Richard Sherman was covering Michael Crabtree, and for that touchdown, almost had it, but Richard Sherman's just too good. And apparently, when he comes out, he's like, if you throw a sorry-ass receiver like Michael Crabtree at me, I win every time, And it's stuff like that. And then even 2 years ago, it was a race for the number one seed, the NFC. And since they're both in the NFC West, it's the number one seed will take that number one. The winner takes the number one, and the loser will take the number 5 seed. So that's huge because, home field advantage. And the game ended with a tackle on the 1 yard line. And that's how the game ended. That is intense, super clutch, fun football to watch. So my personal favorite right now is the Niners and Seahawks rivalry.
Yeah, I had Niners and Seahawks listed. I also have Rams Seahawks just from the past few years. I don't think it's as intense as that Niners Seahawks playoff rivalry, but Rams beating them last year in the playoffs. A couple games before, the Seahawks pretty much destroyed the Rams. And they were, smoking cigars like they won the division, and they're acting all cocky about it. And of course, we saw a couple weeks later the Rams go in and their defense just shuts down the Seahawks. I even have Rams Niners. Maybe it's a little NFC West bias. Last year, last year for some reason Rams couldn't even beat the fucking Niners. For some fucking reason, well, probably because Jared Goff is just terrible and he's not there anymore. Thank God. I have Patriots Steelers, a little bit more of a recent one. I guess we didn't really. I mean, now that Tom Brady's gone, that's kind of done with. But they've been two of those top teams in the AFC in the past. I have one little one from growing up: Raiders and Chargers. Both of them now are, I guess, getting better, but. Growing up, I remember when the Raiders were somewhat good and they went to the Super Bowl that 1 year versus the Bucks. That's when the Chargers had Drew Brees and they were on the uprise, and then the Raiders became terrible. But they would always have good games with the Chargers. What would you say is your worst rivalry currently right now, James?
Chiefs and Raiders, hands down. It's a self-proclaimed rivalry by the Raiders. The Raiders have won one game against the Chiefs the last couple of years. That was last year. For it to be a rivalry, you have to have more competitive games. And they won one, and it was a close game. But other than that, the Chiefs have just been blowing them out consistently. Not a rivalry at all. I have no idea why the Raiders think they're good enough to even call it a rivalry. But that's what it is. And I think that's the worst rivalry out there.
Yeah, I have that written down. And I also have Lions Vikings. It's kind of similar, the Lions claim that they hate the Vikings so much. It's dude, you guys aren't even allowed to hate anybody how bad you are. It's just like what you basically said, but with another division. Player-wise, I have Crabtree and Sherman. I have a Brett Favre when he was on the Packers forever, and then he went to the Vikings. I mean, I feel like the Packers fans didn't really hate on him for doing that, but it was kind of weird, going from that team that basically they hate each other and have hated each other forever. I also have the whole NFC East versus T.O. I feel like they all hated him.
Everybody, yeah, for sure.
Tyler, would you say you hated on T.O. when he was on the Cowboys?
Yeah, I didn't. When TL was kind of around, I wasn't really into football back then, so I don't really remember those days quite as much. Like I didn't really get into football, probably like really get into it to like high school. So it was kind of like after those heydays. So I don't really remember that very well,
Yeah.
but I'm sure if I was a bigger fan, then that would be a huge one for sure.
Yeah, you would have hated him.
Yeah.
So we kind of got into this, like, what are some new and interesting rivalries, James, that you've seen in the NFL?
Okay, so this is on.
It could be players and teams.
I'm just gonna do teams,
All
but
right.
right now I have the Chiefs and the Ravens, and the Chiefs and the Texans. Mainly because you have two young budding superstars on those teams. Patrick Mahomes is a superstar. Lamar Jackson is a generational superstar in his own right. And if Deshaun Watson gets through his court cases, he's also a generational quarterback. The fact of the matter is, like, these guys are all good and can carry their teams. They're explosive. They're fun to watch. They're going to face off time and time again. I mean, Chiefs, Ravens, we see that often. We would love watching those games. It's two different styles of offenses, two different styles of quarterbacks, but still a great game to watch, always competitive.
Yeah. So you're telling me, what's his name? Deshaun Watson versus massage therapist is one of the newest rivalries. No,
It
that's
might be,
fucked up. Yeah, I have Browns versus Steelers, actually.
That's a good one.
I think it all started when I don't even know the guy's name, even though he's like their superstar defensive lineman, when he smashed the guy. Yes, and he took the helmet off the
Mason Rudolph.
Yes, and he smashed him in the head. And like a meaningless game basically for both teams, and smashed him in the head with his own helmet. That's what started off. And then last year, the whole Juju Smith-Schuster doing his trash little fucking dance on the Browns logo in the playoffs. And then the Browns end up molly-whopping him. And then they all start saying a bunch of shit back to him. It's like, it's created a good little rivalry. And plus, fuck the Steelers. And then I got, player-wise, I got Tom Brady versus Mahomes. Seems to be a good little rivalry. I don't think like
I don't know if
they
that's
think
gonna
of it.
last very long, bro.
Yeah, I know. I don't think they think of it either. I think people like me just like try to project it. But you know, when Tom Brady was on the Patriots and they won in overtime versus the Chiefs that one year to go to the Super Bowl, and then you see last year they play each other in the Super Bowl, and we all saw what happened. But yeah, that's pretty much what I got for football. Let's get into baseball, and then everyone can chime in too. Alex, I know you have a lot of baseball knowledge too. Tyler, I'm going to kind of hit you with the same questions since you are a baseball guy. What's your best and worst rivalries of baseball?
So historically, the best rivalry hands down in baseball is Red Sox Yankees. I mean, you can't really beat that. The history behind that, the amount of heated confrontations those two teams have had, the history, all the postseason games in series that they played against each other. Red Sox Yankees hands down is the best rivalry historically in baseball. Dodgers Giants I think is right there behind them. They don't have as much postseason history as Red Sox Yankees, so I think that's kind of why the Red Sox Yankees I think are a little bit higher. I think when two teams that hate each other play each other when it matters in the postseason, that's when it really gets good. And the Red Sox Yankees just have so many of them, and it's so hard to beat that. The Dodgers and Giants never really seem to both be really good at the same time. Like maybe one year and they kind of battle for a division. That's kind of it. But they never really played a meaningful postseason series. Certainly not in my lifetime. But currently, I mean, right now in 2021, Dodgers Padres. I mean, we're going to get into it a little bit later. Historically, those two teams haven't had much, but right now, I think what makes rivalries good are two teams that have beef with each other on both sides, that are competitive and that are trying to win, and are at the top of their game, and they're playing for the same division, and they're playing for the same prize. So currently it's Dodgers Padres, but historically Red Sox Yankees.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just answered like 7 questions in one, which is good. That's nice and efficient. I like it.
Yep.
I have Dodgers, Giants, Yankees, Red Sox. I even have Angels, Dodgers. I mean, you can call it a rivalry. You can call it like the Kings, Ducks, but we're not in the same division and all that, or even in the same. You guys are national, we're American, but You
Not
can
even
call it a
the same level of
rivalry
play,
because the
dude.
whole free, huh?
So it's not even the same level of play.
I know. It's
Like,
fucking. It's
Yeah,
not
that one's
yet.
hard. That
Not
one's
yet.
hard just because, like as you mentioned, they're not even playing. They're not even in the same league, so the games they
Yeah.
play each other don't mean a whole lot in terms of standings and stuff. It's more just for fans bragging rights, I think, more than anything else, which is still fun, and I think that's a good thing for the fans. But I think for the teams and kind of what it means, it doesn't really mean much. So I think that's why it's hard to kind of label that as a rivalry.
There's a World Series matchup.
Yeah, unless it's the World Series, then that'd be awesome. But that's never happened.
I believe they play this weekend, so we'll get our bet wagers
May 8th,
going.
guys. May 8th.
May 8th. Be there.
Yeah. So player wise, I have from what I remember, remember when Pedro Martinez just chucked that Yankees manager on the ground? Like
They said Red Sox Yankees. That's
Red Sox Yankees. It's
one
it's
of
crazy.
many great moments.
It's crazy how many times they've literally like just battled each other in the playoffs and had a bunch of shit like that happen.
Yeah.
I have Machado versus the Dodgers.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But like you said, that's tackling the new and interesting, which I would say is Padres Dodgers could be like one of the most interesting rivalries that has begun probably since like last year when the Padres finally started doing all right. Tatis versus Bauer is already like picked up to a new rivalry.
I was gonna say that one's probably the best current one. I mean, Trevor Bauer versus anyone really. He just he loves to go after everybody. So Bauer Tatis will be a really fun one.
I got Angels Astros as well as Dodgers Astros. I mean Dodgers Astros because of the whole World Series and the cheating and all that shit, and then Angels Astros because they are in the same division and they always seem to battle each other. I feel like we've traded a bunch of guys to their team that are now doing good, so another reason for us to hate them. And that's pretty much what I got for baseball, Tyler. You pretty much tackled it all right there. I put old and boring Phillies just because they're just old and boring. Fuck them.
Just all the Phillies matches
just all the Phillies.
Any team the Phillies ever play. It's just a boring game.
They're kind of a boring team.
Yeah. See?
There you go.
Alex, you got anything to chime in with baseball-wise?
Yeah, Cubs Cardinals. That's a historic one.
That's a good one.
Typically the Cardinals have been pretty good, and the Cubs have won World Series in the last 120 years. So, Cubs Cardinals is always a good one. Like Eric Gagne, Barry Bonds as like a player matchup, just power, like roids, 2003.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I thought of. But yeah,
Nice.
I mean, right now, Dodgers Padres. I mean, it's the best. Right now, for sure.
Yasuko Puig versus Madison
Bumgarner.
That's a good
Oh
one.
yeah,
That's a good one.
That was a good one.
Who would win in that fight?
That's one a lot of people we debated this a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. I feel like Puig definitely has more of the physicality and he's just crazy. But I think Bumgarner might have a little more tactical like IQ.
He's country boy.
Dude,
Yeah,
he's
strong.
a farm. Exactly. You got that
I
farm
think
worker strength.
I think pre-injury, I might give it to Bumgarner. Post like shoulder issues,
Yeah.
it's gotta be Puig.
Yeah. I think I'll give the slight edge to Puig, but I'm a little biased.
It's like a matador with a bowl. Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much. Yeah.
nice. That's some good stuff right there. Let's get into hockey. Trading. Hockey just seems to be like, you hate every team that's not your own on the ice, and it's just great because they just let them fight. So I feel like they all have a good amount of respect for each other. But right off the bat, I'm getting into the bet. What are your best rivalries of hockey?
Yeah,
that you've
so
seen?
I got to start with the obvious one because I think it's kind of had been reborn in the last couple of years, and that's the Battle of Alberta. Mostly because, and I'm so fired up about that, obviously. Back in 1980 when Atlanta moved the team to Calgary, that's when the rivalry, started. And in that time, Gretzky was, in the 80s, Gretzky was part of the Oilers, and they won, many cups there. And Calgary was, close behind, and they were both very, very good in that era. And those are bloody rivalries. And we saw it last year. February 1st last year, we saw a goalie fight and like 10 goals in a game. Like it was something that I never saw as a kid, but it's something my dad saw. So we got to experience that together in this day and age, which was unbelievable. It felt like it was old school hockey, and that's still continuing, even though Calgary is not that great. There's still some good skill on both ends, and I think that's going to be, as long as Calgary at least stays in there, that's going to be a strong one. Any rivalry that has to do with the original six, you can mix and match any of the original six, and you're gonna have a decent rivalry. But the biggest one by far is Montreal versus Boston. Montreal versus Boston is basically the Red Sox Yankees.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah,
it's the oldest rivalry in the NHL. They've faced each other 927 times over 100 years. 11 full 82 game seasons between the two of them. 29 Stanley Cups between the two of them, which is roughly 25% of all the cups ever won. And they just absolutely hate each other. So you add in this fact that they're one of the original six teams, right? So they're playing each other back in the day. They're playing each other, night in, night out. And then there's also not only is there a team kind of loyalty thing, but there's also a country loyalty thing, Canada versus USA, which, has always been such a heated rivalry, which leads me to probably the biggest current hockey, and not just NHL, but hockey rivalry. And that's actually US versus Canada in the women's league. Though there has not been any other country between the, outside of those two that have won an Olympic gold medal, any world championship, anything. There's even exhibition rivalry series just for those two teams, just so they can face each other 5 times and beat each other up in any way that they can. And those girls are incredible. Those women are absolutely incredible. So that is probably the hottest rivalry in the hockey world. And then I guess I got to give a shout out to back in the 90s, early 2000s, the Red Wings versus Colorado. That was when they were in the same division. Those two teams just absolutely hated each other. And I lived in Montana. In Montana, everyone loved the Red Wings the Avalanche, because they were the closest there. And all you heard was, fuck the Red Wings, fuck the Red Wings. That's all it was when I was growing up. And, I'm an Oilers fan, so it really didn't, it really didn't matter to me. But that was considered probably the biggest rivalry, up until, recent times, which, recent rivalries, there's not as much anymore, just because the fighting's kind of gone away, the game's kind of changing. But you always have, Battle of Alberta, you always have the original 6 battles, and I guess Washington and Pittsburgh is kind of a forced one. I'm kind of tired of that one, but it is what it is.
I got I got to throw in our Kings bias. Kings Sharks was once a good rivalry with the playoff battles for sure. Kings Ducks has been more of like a refurbished rivalry. Definitely. Because they're both just so terrible now. So it's like every time they play each other, they're like, it's on right now as we speak.
But until recently, they were very good. They were, like all the Canadian teams before, last couple of years were all good. And those 3 teams have just hated each other this whole time.
Yeah, Kings, Ducks, Kings and Sharks. And then even like Sharks and Ducks, they have a little bit of a rivalry. They were like more in the past. They played each other in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I got Kings Blackhawks when both of them were kind of on their runs. They didn't like each other. They beat us one year in the playoffs and won the cup. Next year we beat them in the playoffs and won the cup. I got your Canadians, Bruins, Oilers, Flames. I'd say, like kind of now the worst rivalries are the ones that are just old and boring now is like Penguins, Capitals seems to be kind of old. Penguins, Flyers, that seems to be an older one that you don't really hear about anymore.
The ones that I probably hate the most, to be honest, and thank God, because NBC is no longer going to be doing our games, at least allegedly. NBC really forces rivalries, and rivalries, as you guys can agree, in any of these sports, they can't be forced. They have to be organic. And when they're shoved down our throats, it gets so old, and the teams just aren't into it. They're not into it enough for it to be an actual rivalry. Until we actually see blood on the ice, there's not a rivalry.
Well, that's like almost every night in hockey. So I guess there's rivalry every night,
man.
Trading.
Not anymore. It's actually kind of sad.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, they have like Wednesday night rivalry, the night you love to hate or something like that. But we won't be seeing that once ESPN comes in the mix. I have player wise, like I have Crosby versus Ovechkin. People always try to like make that a rivalry. I'd probably rather take Ovechkin because he would just beat the hell out of him probably.
Yeah.
But Crosby seems to be more talented, makes his team better, where Ovechkin just scores a lot and
I agree.
Just a horse. Cassian versus Kachuk. That kind of was something that came up last year.
Yeah.
Two bums I wouldn't want ever on my team.
I think there's a bit of a rivalry with Kachuk and Doughty. That's clear.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to next. Doughty and Kachuk. So everybody hates Kachuk. Fuck them. We all know that. Everybody loves Doughty. End of story.
Ryan Reeves versus Evander Kane is hysterical.
I want to see Evander Kane fight him again. I feel like Evander Kane has that.
Kane would not be stupid enough to do that because Ryan Reeves would knock his teeth in.
I want to see Reeves get knocked on the ice, like just punched out. I want like Lucic to grab him. I don't think he would ever do that though. But the way the NHL formatted this year, that we're not going to see that. So thanks NHL, you fucks. The last thing I'll say, new and interesting series rivalries of hockey. I got Bruins Rangers. That kind of happened this year, but because of the whole division shit. Kings Vegas, because they swept us in the playoffs, and we need to play them again in the playoffs one day, redeem ourselves. Sharks Vegas has been a good one.
Yes, that's the Ryan
seems
Reeves,
to be one of the newer, better ones.
Yeah.
And then I guess even you could say this year, we'll see it in the playoffs if it happens. Wild versus Vegas. The Wild have that little spark. They're actually, I think, like 3-1 or like 4-1 versus Vegas. They've like had their number this whole year, so it'd be interesting to see them in the playoffs. I don't know if you got any more trading or Alex or anybody.
I mean, you kind of hit them all. While I don't want it to be forced, I hope that Vancouver can get a regional rivalry in Seattle. They'll face each other 4 to 5 times a year, and I hope that both teams are good enough for it can actually be an organic battle for the Pacific Northwest. Other than that, that's all I got.
Nice. Yeah, tackled all the ones that I was expecting to tackle. Last but not least, Alex, we got the NBA. Seems to be lots of historical rivalries and new ones. But what are your best and worst rivalries?
Yeah, so 3 best off the top of my head, or not, well, I mean, like that I can think of. Watching The Last Dance, Bulls Pistons for sure. Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas. That was a different time in the NBA. I mean, they literally beat the shit out of each other on the court. Like you couldn't get away with that in today's NBA in a heartbeat. So Bulls Pistons for sure. Then a little more recent, Lakers, Spurs, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Kobe, Shaq. Those were like growing up. I mean, they seemed like they met in the playoffs all the time. They were both really good all the time. Tim Duncan's got 5 championships. Kobe's got 5. Those were big ones. And then, historically, the most historic one is obviously Lakers Celtics. They've played in the finals against each other the most out of any 2 teams in any sport ever. They both are now tied with 17 championships apiece. The Lakers have won a lot more recently. The Celtics, went on an incredible run with Bill Russell. So Lakers Celtics, player-wise, I mean, kind of LeBron, Steph, like a recent one, except the NBA now they're so like buddy that it's kind of hard to call it a rivalry, but they play, when they play, when they play, 5 times or 4 or 5 times, whatever it is in a row. LeBron, Steph, the worst one, Eric, close your ears. Lakers, Clippers. It's tough. Sorry, Clippers fans, but like you haven't done shit. So you can't really be a rival of the Lakers. It's more of like the last 2 years only, but they haven't played each other in the playoffs yet. The Clippers have unfortunately like nothing to their name in the side of history. where the Lakers are one of the two most historic franchises in the league. So we haven't really said worst much, but that one to me is hands down the worst.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The Clippers have nothing to prove. They have 0 championships, 0 Western Conference Finals. I saw like a stat. I'm trying to find it right now because you sparked me. But in the last like 5 years, the Clippers have beaten the Lakers. I think the Lakers have only beat the Clippers like 5 times or something. And since like the Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan era, when the Lakers, in Kobe's last few years and all that. So I would say just more of recently, as far as just like the rivalry of them playing each other, the Clippers have had their number. But as far as doing it in the playoffs, the Clippers just don't have that in them yet. Hopefully, but yeah, the Lakers, Celtics, all the Bulls, Pistons. I have all those. I got 76ers, Celtics. It seemed to be more of a recent one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The Celtics have just beaten them down. I feel like this year, if they see each other, it's kind of going to be different. 76ers finally got some life. Player-wise, historically speaking, like Magic versus Bird, Michael Jordan and the original Isaiah Thomas. I have now a recent Paul George and Devin Booker kind of seem to like butt heads with each other.
Paul George and Dame.
Yeah, and I was just going to say everybody versus Paul George. I feel like a lot of people go at Paul George because he also is another guy that hasn't really proved it in the playoffs, So he's an easy target to go at. Chris Paul and Rondo, we kind of remember that whole baffle. I know that they still kind of beef when they play each other. Team wise, new and interesting. But also could be the worst is Clippers Lakers. Suns Jazz is this year a little bit more of an interesting, seems to be kind of a rivalry forming because it's like they're the 1 and 2 seeds and they play each other a good amount. They're not far from each other. They match up pretty well. Clippers Jazz, the Jazz have had the Clippers number since they took them out in the playoffs like 4 years ago. That was like Chris Paul's last year there. Knicks and Nets seem to have a little bit of a rivalry going right now. I think with the Knicks just finally like not being complete dog shit and becoming a better team. They're giving the Nets some good battles.
Ron Artest versus fans in the stands.
Yeah, versus everybody in the
versus Meta World Peace, bro.
Well, he was Ron Artest then. Okay,
before.
The player formerly known as Ron Artest, now Meta World Peace, versus anyone that's not on his team or fans.
Yeah, basically. This isn't really a rivalry, but Lakers Pelicans last year because Anthony Davis got traded for like 5 guys that were all there on the Lakers. So I feel like those guys were all, butthurt about it. Lonzo and Ingram and all them. But it's their fault. They didn't do shit when they were there. So they got traded. I guess one other one you can mention, but it's kind of old and boring now, is the Thunder versus Trailblazers, which was the origination of the Paul George versus Dame rivalry. James, you got any other basketball ones?
Just an old, like the Bulls and the Jazz back in the day. John Stockton, Karl Malone, Michael Jordan. That was some good basketball. This is like a long shot, but I think one that's budding and will be one in the future will be the Hornets and the Pelicans. LaMelo versus Zion, 2 young guns. They're both kind of leading their teams on a good start, especially with the Hornets right now. Like LaMelo is injured, but he's going to get better. He looks good. So in the future, in the next 10 years or so, I'd look out for that rivalry.
Yeah, and then the last one we got to mention is what Alex was talking. The Warriors versus LeBron, just because they kind of seem to have his number, in the finals. I mean, what did they beat him 2 or 3 times? Even though he did have that historic comeback series versus them. But, yeah, the NBA is always playing tummy sticks with it, trying to make it look like they're boys and all this shit. But, that's just the difference of all the leagues around. But that's why we have sports. That's why we have rivalries. And that is all I got for this segment, guys.
That was fun. I mean, rivalries are great. We all love them, obviously.